So if you've been doing about a habit a week, you've been in this for over a month now. Congratulations, you're still here. I'm still here. I'm really glad to see you're sticking with it. And that your book club is sticking with it. It's a powerful experience to be with other people. And in many of it, we'll show up in a group in a certain way. Some of us may be like trying to be at the head of the class, and others of us might be the rebel. I was usually the rebel who's also trying to be at the head of the class. But like whatever our tendencies are, sometimes we can start to see like whether they're functional for the group or not, or whether part of this process is enabling us to grow and be in a group in new ways. So I just wanted to throw that in, a little sprinkle of sugar on top there. If we look back, what I would do in starting your book group this week is look back and what is the biggest aha so far? And just start the conversation there. And just articulating it, even if it's the same aha you had 2 weeks ago, but now you're like, yeah, it really is an aha. And it can be around a particular habit. As we start to see that might be our keystone habit, like that might be the one that, and it's not the one forever often, but the keystone habit is usually the one that's going to make the biggest difference right now in this phase of our life. I was talking with one of the yoga health coaches yesterday, and she was describing when she discovered that her keystone habit was start the day right with hydration and elimination. She was someone who had also, just struggled with being irregular. And when she focused on that habit and it became the keystone, she noticed that her day, like everything would flow after that. It was a simple thing. She'd been teaching yoga for a long time, but just hadn't, she'd heard a little bit about how you were supposed to eliminate in one of her yoga teacher trainings. But it was a habit that she hadn't automated yet. So when we start to identify like, hey, what's working here? And we zone in like, okay, maybe that's my keystone habit. And we start to get serious about it. We commit and we start to see like, what is the trigger for that habit? And for many people, it's time related. For other people, it's place related, or it's preceding habit. Get out of bed, then what do I do? Just starting to zone in. Just like zoom in with the camera lens to see like exactly what are the micro steps that make sure that I do this. So I would start by, again, connecting around that, maybe do a little bit of a written exercise to zone in on what is emerging, what habits are making the difference, which one little habit or big habit is making the biggest difference, and starting to look at the little things that happen before that make sure that you do that. I may be saying like, hey, that might be my keystone habit right now. All right, so now moving on. Last week was breath body practices. And today, finally, we're talking about food. When I first started creating this 10 Habits 10-week program, my experimental yoga health coaches were like, we want to start with food. A number of them wanted to start with food. A number of them wanted to start with meditation. And I'm like, those are all really great ideas. For many of you, you might say like, hey, wait, but earlier, later dinner was a lot about food. And that's true, it is. So much in our culture is about what to eat and what not to eat. And I find that we have a lot of education around that already. We have some usually well-defined thoughts and beliefs around that, which are fine. I mean, they've often come as hard-won education. And so we're usually starting from a place of knowing a lot about what to eat. What we find from the Ayurvedic perspective is that not enough emphasis is placed on how we eat, right? Like, are we eating on the run? So many of my students in the past have found that when they start to really look at earlier, later dinners, they start to notice that like, wow, I'm usually not that hungry earlier because I've been snacking all afternoon, or I have this nice latte at 2 p.m. and it's full of milk or cream, and so I'm not really hungry at dinner time. We start to see what's preventing us from being in a more natural eating and digestive rest cycle. So now finally, at long last, we're turning our attention to what we're putting in our mouth. And I just invite you to use the worksheets on this, and particularly the species tracking worksheet. I find really insightful. If we start to see like, hey, what do we always put in the grocery cart? What do always ends up in our mouth? And there are ways to start to diversify that, both into our ecosystem, maybe even just into our grocery store, starting to use 3 different kinds of sprouts instead of always choosing the same one. Just looking at that, different plants have different intelligences. And as we take them into our bodies becomes more informed. If we look at a more scientific way to look at that, it's micronutrients. We get different nutrients from different plants. If our diet is really limited, so will our nutrient intake. Those are the building blocks for our tissue formation. And so we're kind of short-circuiting ourselves. For those of you who are more advanced, I would start to look at what species you can be bringing in. And maybe it's on an annual basis. So I know for me, before I was living in Mexico in the winters, I was living in Idaho year round, and we would have about an 8-month latent season. So I started to dry a lot of different species I'd gather out in the woods in the forest. And I would then be able to use those as teas and as green powders and as soup mixes during the winter. So for some of you, it might just simply be like scheduling that into your calendar next summer to go learn about some of the different plants in your ecosystem. If you're in an urban environment, you might start to look at like, hey, can I do a little bit of indoor gardening? Are there a few plants I can just grow? Can I start sprouting and using the sprouts in my salads and my smoothies on top of the different meals that I'm preparing? It's starting to just kind of wake up your relationship with plants themselves. So I hope it's a starting point with really looking at a plant-based diet, that we start to actually connect with plants themselves, and less as just a vehicle to nurture us and more as a cohabitory relationship between us and our planet.